just prepping.
Hey everyone, so thanks so much for tuning in to the Lit Collectives Festival. And sorry that we're starting a little bit late if you are watching live. We've had some technical difficulties. You'd think that by now, by the end of lockdown, everyone would be Zoom professionals, but these kind of technical issues always seem to crop up. So thank you for your patience. And it's just really good to have you here to be able to talk about a subject and themes that are really close to my heart, and also to be in conversation with these two brilliant women and brilliant writers. So first things first, I'd just like to mention that if you do have any questions or contributions or thoughts that you'd like to share as part of this panel session, then please could you comment in the on our YouTube channel and leave your comments in the box. And then at the end of the session, we'll get around to your questions, and we'll respond to you. So it would be great to have some engagement. I know that's one of the things that I think we're all missing about live events and being able to talk and communicate with people. So the more engagement we can have, the better, really. So again, thank you for tuning in. It's great to be here. And the vision behind this panel really is that we thought that in light of COVID-19, in light of the UK's lockdown, and that in combination with the Black Lives Matter protests that have really been happening, not only in the UK and the US, but globally, we thought it would be a good chance to reflect on Black feminism as a kind of political ideology, Black feminism as something that's very personal, and also Black feminism as an alternative way to see the world and to envision things differently, and how we're going to move forward and progress from this moment, and seeing 2020 really is not just a year of upheaval, but also a year where social change might be able to happen. So, and also in light of that, in tune with the ethos of lots of the other panels that have been happening across this literature festival, we really wanted to have the focus on Black women and centre us and talk about our healing and how we kind of can use literature and poetry and creativity as a way to deal with the moment that we're in. So I think I'm going to be asking the questions, I'm going to be the host, and I'm also going to be offering some of my thoughts and random ideas to the conversation. So I'm Amber Lascelles, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Leeds. My PhD is on contemporary Black women's fiction and resistance to neoliberal capitalism. I'm in the School of English, and I also do events and community work, and I generally do work that is under that broader theme of Black feminism. I do some activist work in Black communities, and yeah, I just really love books and literature. So if Amina and Désirée, if you'd also like to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really, really excited. I'm Amina. I am a Somali writer, a poet, curator, producer. I am part of the Octavia Women of Colour Poetry Collective, which is run by Rachel Long, an amazing facilitator and friend. That's housed at the South Bank Centre. What else? I'm a co-host for a poetry night called Boxed In East London that's been going on for about 7 years. Yeah, and my debut poetry pamphlet, A Warning to the House That Holds Me, which is all about Somali culture, Islam, Blackness, womanhood, was published last year by Flipped Eye.
Wow, it's just so interesting. I want to get your publication.
Thanks.
I'm going to get, straight after this, I'm going to get. Hi, my name is Désirée. I live in Sheffield. I was born in London, Clapham, came up to do my degree, and then never came back. I'm a writer. I'm a teacher of creative writing as well. My writing is mostly concerned with the same as Amina's actually, womanhood, personhood, thoughts of home, diaspora, which I think is quite important. And I write short stories. I've written a book. I'm now just about completing the second one. Hallelujah. And just started a third, which just makes me a sucker for punishment.
Amazing.
Thank you. Oh, I'm really excited to just learn from you both. So the first question really is one that I just want to really open up to you both, and maybe Amina, you could answer first. So what does Black feminism mean to you?
Yeah, I guess kind of what you touched on in your introduction. Like for me, Black feminism is a theory, but it's also like a space of affirmation and liberation as well. I think it found a gap in feminism and like how feminism was exclusionary to Black women, and it filled that gap, and not just for Black women, but for anyone that's marginalized, anyone that is from a community that isn't seen or isn't heard, from a community that is, I guess, forced to live in a system that wasn't created to benefit them or wasn't designed to benefit them. Yeah, and I don't know, I think personally, a lot of Black feminism for me is, I'm not an activist. I'm a writer, but it is like embedded in my everyday life, I guess. And I think there's an Audre Lorde quote I'm gonna paraphrase it. Don't hate me for paraphrasing it. But there's an Audre Lorde quote that says something about to define yourself for yourself means to not be eaten whole, I think. And I think Black feminism does that for me, in a sense of like being from like many different intersections, like being Black and being Muslim and being a woman. I couldn't find my place in feminism, I guess, and I'm going to say in white feminism, and that I did find my place in Black feminism because it encompasses all of that, all of my existence and all of the existence of my peers and people that I know, I guess. But yeah, so for me it is a form of activism, but it's also a form of liberation as well. Yeah.
Just agreeing with what Amina said, actually. It's exactly all those things for me too, which is one of the most beautiful things about it, I guess. Black feminism, I guess it's a reclamation of the self, where we are proud of who we are and we can say that out loud and proudly, rather than it being something that we have to kind of negotiate in the dark, perhaps. And as you said, quite rightly, that white feminism or second wave feminism excluded Black and brown women, excluded anything other than themselves. And therefore the act of saying who we are is activism in a way, isn't it? So I think that's what Black feminism means to me. I think also when we talk about literature now, if we talk about Black feminism in literature, or how do we marry those two things up, I think it means that literature then centers Black women and girls, and that centering actually can be more difficult than you think. It's a process rather than a done deal, and that having a piece of writing or a bit of poetry or some prose that has a Black woman or girl in it isn't enough to say that makes it Black feminist, or that makes it okay, or she has to have her own agency. The story is motivated by her actions, her wants, her desires, the things that she finds that are obstacles, and very much based in who she is rather than who other characters think she is. Or, you know, in lots of literature, sometimes the Black woman can be exceptional. She's very pale, or she's got very tall hair, and therefore that then drives the narrative. Things happen because of how she looks, and I think that's not centering her, that's projecting onto her. So in terms of literature, I think it's her wants and desires and obstacles is what has to drive the narrative. for me.
I think just to add to that, Black feminism, for me, the reason why I find it so liberating is because, of course, it's made by Black women for Black women, but it's also, and of course it is as a result of the oppression of Black women, but it is also very much rooted in hope and joy and all of these like life affirming things that we find in it and we can get from it. And also because really it's about transformation and transforming the world. And of course, that doesn't just benefit Black women, that benefits everyone. And what I find in it is in the rejection of patriarchy, that is beneficial to so many people. And I just find it really inclusive and yeah, and it's just, I think it's the kind of worldview that everyone should learn more about because it allows you to see the world so differently and allows you to see the world beyond this kind of very capitalist, hyper-masculine version of the world that we're all unfortunately in, especially right now. So
yeah, definitely. And I think it's definitely a privilege to not have to think about like your race and your position in society as a woman. And I think Black women don't have that privilege. Black women they literally live between like a rock and a hard place. Like it is either you're dealing with racism, you're dealing with patriarchy. And so often it's not the or of that, it's like the and, do you know what I mean? Like it's not two things that exist like in parallel. Like for our lives, like that crosses over. Like we have to deal with those things, as they collide. And also thinking about that, we're also thinking about how it collides with sexuality and how it collides with class and legal status and gender and just all of those things.
I think maybe that can kind of feed us into the next question, which is, but I wanted us to think about, again, returning to this moment and what this means, what 2020 means for Black feminism. There's been lots of talks of abolition, which really, if you look at the work of somebody like Angela Davis, who is a Black Panther, a Black feminist icon, basically, definitely one of mine, she has been talking for decades about police abolition, and now all of a sudden these things that were very like specific to Black feminism, or even people that are interested in political theory, are quite mainstream conversations, and you hear it on the news. So I wanted really to think about what this recent wave of Black Lives Matter protests means. How can we reflect on it, and what does it mean for Black feminism? How might it change the way we think about racism and inequality?
I think the movement has been such a powerful force for good, and I mean it was started by Black women and Black trans women all those years ago. And women, as far as I can see in my activist spaces, women still hold up the core of that activist work. Thinking, I went to a Kathleen Cleaver event, Black Panther, and I asked this really stupid question. I said, so, you know, because we all know what happened to the Panthers, and we're like, well, how? And I said to her, how do we sustain a movement? What do we need in order for movements to succeed? And she said, make sure that all the women are at the forefront. Make sure all the women are at the forefront. And I was like, of course, yeah, that's right. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement, which I think there's also a distinction to be made between the British one and the USA one too, probably, has done that. It's pushed those issues of women at the forefront, also with the whole Say My Name, Say Her Name campaign. And without that, but without Black Lives Matter, they wouldn't have been that reaction to, you know, the deaths in police custody, or the deaths at the hands of the police of women too. So I think it's kind of fostered a conversation that's still yet to run and run and run. And it shows, I think it shows that I think Black Lives Matter, for me anyway, shows that single issue movements will always fail. And exactly what you said before, Amber, and Amina just now as well, about the encompassing of all the most marginalized voices is how that's the centering of those is that is the only way in which a movement will succeed. Otherwise, these single issue movements will always fall down. And we see that that when we do that's when people flourish, and that's when Black lives flourish, and that's Black trans lives, that's Black disabled lives, that's Black migrant lives. That's when it flourishes. If we don't do that, then I find it difficult to see a future.
No, I completely agree. And yeah, like I have to remind myself as well that the Say Her Name hashtag or the campaign was literally started after the death of Sandra Bland, and because her name was not being carried on and her life was not being carried on after that. And it is always Black women, and it has always been Black women that are campaigning and protesting and providing, I guess. And I do think that this current wave of the movement, and I don't even want to call it a movement because it's not really, it isn't a movement because it is our lives as well. But this current wave has been really revolutionary for so many people, and I think it's been particularly interesting because it's been in the middle of a global pandemic, and I think that definitely has played some role in the fact that it just reminds people that we're all living in this pandemic and we're all fighting to stay alive. But then on top of that, being Black means that you're additionally fighting to stay alive, and that's exhausting, and it's really not a fight that we should be like having to continue. But it has made me definitely positive in some ways, and I think the exactly what you said, Désirée, like about Black feminism and Black Lives Matter sort of having the same goals, because I think Black feminism has always fought to believe that if Black women are not cared for or are not really understood, then everything else around is going to fall apart. Do you know what I mean? And with Black Lives Matter, it's a complete understanding that if all Black lives don't matter, then everything else is going to fall apart around us as well. So I think it has been two sides of the same thing for me.
I've been thinking a lot about how we avoid co-option too. So I think that when you have conversations happening on such a mainstream level, how do you then avoid people using Black Lives Matter as a kind of empty slogan, especially when you're talking about institutions, brands, corporations that are not actually in their practices and in their workforces and even in like the way they produce their clothes, or that they're not practicing Black Lives Matter in their actions. They're just saying it with their words in order to kind of appeal to a liberal audience, right? I guess that's what I'm always wary of, because my work is thinking about how Black feminism can avoid this kind of, or how Black feminism is rooted in anti-capitalism, really. And we can't have liberation while we still have capitalism, because capitalism is so closely bound up with the kind of exploitation of Black people, and always has been in the West. So I've been thinking about, whilst I think that this could be a really revolutionary moment, how do we avoid it being just co-opted and becoming empty? And maybe one of those ways is by returning to Black feminism, Black feminist texts, Black feminist ideas, listening to Black women, and building from there.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably also why a lot of the conversation is sort of turning towards abolitionist theory and what it means to abolish like police systems or like the justice system, and what it means to rebuild that as well. And I guess in a weird sense, I went to a few BLM protests in London a few weeks ago, and I felt really uncomfortable by the amount of people that would get up and do their speeches and be like, we need to protect our Black women. And I don't know, that phrase has always never really sat well with me, I guess, because for me it's like twofold, because it's like you're saying our Black women, and you're saying like that's creating a sense of ownership over us and our bodies, and then also what does it mean to protect us? Like I just think that's so rooted in like masculinity and feeling like you have some power over our bodies or have some power to be able to protect us, and then as well, like, who are you protecting us from? Because I so often think that, like in spaces like that, like you're protecting us from yourselves. Like you should be, the conversation isn't about protecting Black women. The conversation should be about how are you dismantling patriarchy in your own brain, your own system, in your own lives. So I just, yeah, exactly what you're trying to say about like brands as well. Like it isn't enough at this point to just put up a post or anything when you have this long history behind you of having the opportunity in countless times to support Black women and not taking that opportunity and not working on that at all. But it's come to a point where you now can just post it on social media, and I think that's, yeah, it's
that's so true. I'm just nodding away like yeah I completely agree with you. Just thinking about what you said, it just kind of made me think, oh gosh, that whole protection thing is like, what when they say, I want to know what protection means as well. Like, you know, what is the definition of protection to you? Because what means protection to you might not be the same to me. And better you ask a Black woman what it is that she would like, rather than making these proclamations, you know, mic grabbing and making these proclamations that sound good because you know what sounds good. And that dismantling patriarchy and capitalism is, again, for me, the only way forward, and is harder to do. I think the social media activism stuff, I think it fades. I think social media stuff, it's cyclical for one, and it comes and it goes, and the whole, you know, posting a Black square on your Insta thing or posting a Black square on Twitter was just a little bit eye-rolly. I was like, oh my gosh, how far is this gonna go? Or the fact that I was seeing a lot of universities, Amber can speak to this, talking about, you know, how they can best protect their students, or how they can, well, back to that word protect, but how they can best support their students, and realizing that loads of students, loads of Black women in particular, was coming out saying how universities hadn't supported them at all. People had stopped their studies. People were traumatized by the experience. I actually was traumatized by my PhD experience, and had to leave early. And that was because of racism. And I think that what we have to do now is that we'll make social media work for us and hold those people to account as a force, as opposed to that one lone woman that says, hang on, but you treated me badly. But, you know, if we come as a collective to say this university really isn't working, or this practice really isn't working, then that can help. But I honestly don't know how we stop appropriation. You know, how do we? This is the $1 million question, as well as other $1 million questions. But how do we stop it? It's like the word diverse. I mean, I've always hated it. What they've done with the word diverse and intersectionality is like, oh my goodness. I don't know how we stop it for real, apart from making sure that what we believe and that we center ourselves, basically, which again, I think is harder to do than we realize sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's really, we can't stop appropriation, and we can't stop things being co-opted as soon as they become mainstream or as soon as people hear about it. But I think we can maybe use it as an opportunity to to talk about the work of Black feminists and talk about our own experiences and be listened to, rather than people always kind of thinking that, oh, it's being made about race. Well, it's like the world is structured around race. Maybe you can't see it, but it is, and we do need to have those conversations. So.
Yeah.
It's always from it's always from a space of defensiveness, I guess, when people come back at you and they're like, why do you always need to bring up race? Why is it always about race? And it's like, well, why are you so defensive about that as well? Because you're right, it is always about race. It always has been.
I think, so the next thing that I wanted to think about is turning it more towards imagination, really. I think that it's important for us to, it can make you feel so heavy, like talking and thinking about these kind of things, and also just like being who we are. But I wanted us to think about imagination and what the relationship is between that and Black feminism, really.
So I think it kind of, I think imagination, I mean, I'm a writer, so it's what I do, but I think it allows us to envision what life could be like. And if we can envision that idea without oppression, without patriarchy, without racism, if we can see it or feel it in some way, shape or form, then we can work towards it. I think without imagination, then that will be so much harder to do. Then that will be related to, I don't know, facts and figures and stats and these quantifiable measures, but it's not the same thing. I mean, that probably relates to the other question as well, but it's not the same thing as feeling it and as sitting within it and thinking about it and thinking about the future and what it is that we could be, or what it is, where it is that we want to go. And it's that leap of seeing, and without that, I don't know what we can go by. I mean, it's a little, unlike academia, say, which is restrictive. This thought or idea is only valid if someone else has thought of it before and has written it in a form that we approve of, and the form that we approve of is hundreds of years old, which is why I like people like Saja Hartman, and I also like that thing that Toni Morrison said, again, kind of guessing, but that being a Black female writer isn't a shallow place to write from, but it doesn't limit my imagination, it expands it. And there's, you know, whilst we are in an incredible place of Black women being published, there are still so many stories left untold. I keep banging on about how many stories do we get from the Tudors? How many? Nobody ever says that's enough now. So we still have a long way to go. I'm still waiting for those stories.
Yeah, with this question, I was thinking about form a lot as well. So I guess predominantly always written poetry, and sort of tried to branch out into prose, but I always like fall back into poetry as like a comfort zone. But for a really long while, I couldn't write in form. In poetry, it was always free verse because I just thought form was so like limiting and just stressful to be able to like just to be imaginative within those limits of meter or line count or whatever. But then I discovered a poet called Terence Hayes, who had a whole book of sonnets basically, and every sonnet spoke to me in such different ways, and I just thought this is like so incredible. And he had also like developed his own forms as well, and it just made me think a lot more openly about form and about imagination in that sense, and about how I guess like being a Black woman, I already feel like I'm living within a form, if that makes sense. And yeah, I've had to be creative in my whole life anyway to be able to get my opinion across. So that made writing poetry in form less scary for me, I guess, and less daunting to do that. And exactly what you're saying about imagination, like it's one of those things that can't be taken away from us. Do you know what I mean? Like to imagine means to just like imagine freely as well. And I think there's a big reason why a lot of the poetry that I read is all about identity, or it's all about home, and like there's these big themes that people are trying to, I don't know if it's crack, I don't know if they're trying to crack the themes, but they're trying to find their space in that as well. And that all comes, for me, that all comes down to imagining your space and like imagining what you would like to the world around you to become.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, Désirée, as you were talking, I was thinking about something that Bernardine Evarista recently read in an interview, and she was saying that she gets asked, did she find, so she was talking about her book, Girl, Woman, Other, which if you haven't, I'm sure that you two have probably read it, but to the audience, if you haven't read it, you have to read it, it's amazing. But I think she was asked if she found it limiting writing about Black women, and she said, well, when you write about or when you read the African diaspora, you're reading the world. And it always stuck with me because I think people see it as, oh, this is like a kind of minority or a marginalized experience, but it's really not. And as Désirée was saying, that there is so much work there to be done, and there's so many, but Black women live in so many different parts of the world, and we exist in so many different ways, and so we have so much multiplicity that it's really kind of boundless. And that's what I think of when I think about imagination, just kind of the limitless possibilities of writing and imagining imagining otherwise. So I think it also makes me think of so somebody like Octavia Butler, who kind of Afrofuturist writers, or you don't even need the Afro, to be honest, just great writers, people that are reimagining the future from the perspective of a Black woman and what that can look like. And
or Mallory Blackman.
Yeah.
And
I keep thinking about how Octavia Butler is a writer who kind of removes all boundaries, and she writes about the future. She writes about like what could happen. What happened if the whole of society collapsed and it ended up being a Black woman who was. There were so few people that survived. It ended up being a Black woman who was the new sort of leader into this new world, but not a leader in the sense that we think of it, almost like somebody who can shape the world and somebody who can, change society. So
interestingly, actually, so I'm part of Octavia Women of Colour Poetry Collective, which Rachel Long founded, and she named that after Octavia Butler. Exactly what you're saying about like just redefining science fiction, or redefining what it like, just writing in that sense. And that's exactly what Rachel wanted this collective of women of colour to build on, I guess.
Because I think as well what Octavia Butler does and what Mallory Blackman does, and the people that do science fiction or speculative fiction, is, as you say, quite, I agree with you about it, reimagining the future, but also it says as a writer, you can write anything. This actual thing here, I mean, whilst form can be quite interesting to play with, and believe me, I love a good sonnet, but I do, or some Chaucer or whatever, but we don't have to write our pain continuously. And I love the idea of writing anything, and the Black romance fiction, even though I don't like romance fictions, I'm too miserable for romance fiction, but the kind of Black detective fiction, horror, things that we can also tackle all those forms. And I'm waiting for those. And also I think it's important to say that it's systems that have kept people back. People have been writing, Black women have been writing. I'm sure there are women with drawers and drawers full of books and poetry collections and theatre plays and journalistic stuff and memoir and articles. And it's just now that a literature establishment has gone, oh yeah, there are these other people with a different voice that we could also sell, because I'm kind of mindful of the whole capitalist thing too. But I guess that goes back to imagination and what you're talking about, isn't it, Amber? That to reimagine everything from a Black female perspective, it's truly exciting.
I think now would be a good time to, I guess, we've talked a bit about some of our favourite authors, but maybe I could just ask, and this question wasn't really planned, but it feels like it works. Who are some of your favourite Black women authors for thinking about imagination? Or futures, really, futures is what I'm thinking.
It's so hard. Do you want to go?
Go for it.
Oh no, it's so hard because I love everything. And I think obviously Octavia Butler is one. And I think as well, when we talk about, we're coming to a point of thinking about Blackness that isn't African American. And so far, a lot of cultural production or Black creativity has been coming from there. And now we're thinking about, Black Europeans, which includes us, but also includes Black women in Portugal, Black women in Germany, Black women in Spain, in Denmark. So I'm waiting for those. I think that's going to be really exciting and interesting. So you can notice I'm still avoiding the question. So I think probably I love, obviously Toni Morrison is one of my biggest, and Erna Brodber, I think, in terms of locating it in a Caribbean space. And I guess what she doesn't, I mean, she's passed away now and is quite, I think, from the 60s, but she not necessarily that imagined a future, but imagined a present that hadn't been imagined before. So I really I think Erna Brodber is incredible to me. And Gail Jones, again, she was actually edited by Toni Morrison, and that's quite visceral, very emotional, kind of trigger warnings all over the place. Do not read this if you're in a particular space. And yeah, I could go on and on, which is why it makes me nervous, because I could just keep going on and on. But there's a lot of writing, and there's a lot of writers that I know. So being part of the circuit, you're like, wait, did you say my name? Did you? So
shout out Désirée.
I know. So Leonie Ross, quickly, I think she's amazing, and she also imagines futures. She imagines the past. I mean, I don't know if you've read her short story collection, but I think in terms of that writer that is thinking about those dynamics and thinking about what it means to be somewhere else, someone else, then I think she's great. I'll stop.
Yeah, I would love to get a tour of your bookshelf and then just see everyone you're reading. That should be the next Lit Collective sample,
Yeah, I'll put the iron board away.
Tour of Desiree's reading list. I love that. Who am I? Yeah, exactly what you're saying, Desiree. I think there's so many people that I could mention. Actually, when you're talking about, I guess, European Black feminism, I have been reading this book of essays called "To Exist is to Resist: Black Feminism in Europe," and it's really beautiful to see just the commonalities between different European cities in terms of the work that Black feminists are doing, like grassroots work and the organizations that they are building. So it's a book of essays, so I definitely recommend that. I know I've mentioned her so many times, but Rachel Long, she has a new collection out. She's a really, really big inspiration. Grace Nichols was the first sort of song that I discovered when I was I didn't know, because I was never taught by I guess I was never taught by a Black woman. The only Black teacher I had was my head of year, who was really, really amazing. But especially in English, I was never taught by a Black woman. So, and everything that I was writing at that time was like inspired by like Keats or like just, do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't, I didn't find my voice yet, and I wasn't finding my place. And then I discovered Grace Nichols, and I was like, oh, like mind blown, genuinely. Watson Shira, Somali rich writer, has always been like a really, really big staple for me, and like just revolutionized how I see the world of poetry, I guess, and like how because I think for a long while I always thought that to write poetry meant to retell trauma, and it meant to sell that trauma, and Watson changed that view for me in so many ways. Zadie Smith, I really love. Just the way that her novels are so London based. Like there's just, I can see it. I'm walking down the roads. It's great. So I can continue for so long.
I tell you what, though, I'll tell you a little secret, which is now going to be blown out of the water. But I am curating a strand for Off the Shelf, which is the literature festival in Sheffield. I'm creating a black women's strand for them this year. It's been a nightmare because my ambition exceeds the budget so many times. But I'm trying to get Grace Nichols. So fingers crossed.
So dates? What dates? Give us the date.
So it's in October. So it's all over October. And what I'll do is I'll send Amber and you guys the links and things, and it'll be all over Twitter and Instagram. Amazing. When we finally get it sorted, and the program is just in the process of being finalized, but I'm fingers crossed for Grace, man. I'm like, please let her say. I think she did say yes, but then hasn't since got back. So we're like, oh my gosh.
Come on, Grace, come on.
Yeah. Exactly.
So kind of coincidentally, we had a question from somebody on YouTube who wanted us to talk about, are there any particular literary texts by Black women or otherwise that have enhanced your ability to imagine an alternative or better future? And I feel like we're kind of have been answering that almost, so we must be in sync with the person on YouTube who's asked that question. But I think I'd just like to add to some of your thoughts on I'd just like to add, I think some of the most exciting kind of future facing writing at the moment is coming out of Africa, maybe like West Africa especially. So I'm thinking of Tomi Adeyemi, who wrote like the Children of Blood and Bone series, or I'm thinking of Nnedi Okorafor, who I think actually lives in the US but has Nigerian heritage, or I'm thinking of Akweke Emizi, who is a brilliant non-binary writer who is really interested in Yoruba mythology, and I actually think that mythology and spirituality is so fascinating at the moment, and I'm loving this kind of interplay between going back to the past to reimagine the future and so not romanticizing this kind of this is all of the lost spirituality that colonialism kind of destroyed and oppressed and all of that kind of thing, and it was perfect, but it's not so much that, it's more how can we go back to that to progress and move forward and like regain some of these ideas that are so central to our personhood and our being, and we've lost them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't get them back. And some of those writers I think are really great at centering Black women, and also thinking about mythology and spirituality and how that can be turned into something that is empowering.
Yeah, and it touches on what we said before about the gaze, I guess, or we talking around the gaze and what it means to center Black women's voices. And that, again, going back to Toni Morrison, because we spend a lot of our time proving our humanity, and we do that through writing also, as well as just through our daily living. And Toni Morrison did actually say, in order to get that sense without the gaze was to read African writing, because the gaze is not there in the same way.
I think it would be nice now to, if you would like to end with some readings. So Amina, if you'd like to start with a reading, and if then Désirée, you'd like to do yours.
Cool. Yeah, sure. So like I said, I predominantly write poetry, so I'm going to read in a couple of poems for you. And these are new poems, so they're not in my pamphlet that I published last year. But yeah, I've just kind of been playing around with how I've been feeling in lockdown, I guess. So this has come out of that. Wallahi. Arabic word meaning I swear to God, used by Muslims and non-Muslims globally. There is God in everything, but sometimes not in wallahi. I promise I didn't take anything from your closet or lock myself in mine. Wallahi, I asked Novia in the lunch queue if she was Muslim. How wallahi slips from her tongue like date seeds. I believed my mum when she said he would get better. I mean, she said wallahi. I am screws in an empty biscuit tin. Wallahi, I sometimes want to know what it feels like to be white. Wore blue contacts at age 15. Wallahi, I thought no one would notice. There was no foundation shade mode for me. No nude lipstick. Wallahi, they want me to be white too. Someday, I may grow up to have white in me. Wallahi, it will caress my already broken skin like marble. Thank you. The next poem is gonna go straight in. I always feel so weird like reading. I read a poem on Instagram Live, and the way that we got, I guess we couldn't have an audible applause. So the way we did that was like emojis coming through and like the chat. That was really weird to me, just seeing like, yeah, emojis coming up. But I mean, for me, poetry has always been like an experience of like give and take. So when I read a poem, I always gain something from it, and then normally I write a poem. So it's this beautiful exchange for me. So this next poem is after a Somali British writer called Mumtaz al-Mehri. It's called Repeat After Me, but don't. Repeat after me. Our diction is perfect. Reminds us that we are not her children. She is using our hair combs. Reminds us that we are nothing more than a black square. Our mothers ordered the kaffans with the pregnancy test, began the shrouding at birth, predicted their reactions to our skin. We lay perpendicular to the Qibla at night, memorize its feel. We heat the water for our ghusl on the stove. We weep, not wail. We are poor necessity. Greased elbows, a tourniquet at the waist. Bismillah, benevolent people, with earlobes stretched to heels, with gashes on cheeks, with red fingertips, a neck of mustard beads, a split tongue, revolution painted on eyelids, crimson nails. We are everything they fear. We visit Saudi with the hate of republic suppressed. We walk in full circles, men traipsing on our heels, catcalled in mother's hand, all for the love of God. Every Jum'ah is a blessing, every hug a message, every step or breath a protest. I wonder what they hear when we say we just want to keep living. Royal blue scarves draped over school uniforms, with murder's name. They think Black lives can propagate like plants, not when they burn the roots. 72 is not the correct figure. 24 floors, 120 homes, no survivors, make it make sense. You can't lie on lives. Death has a way of telling the truth. Just you wait. We won't stop telling on you. That's me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
That's
it.
not in your pamphlet?
No, neither of those are in my pamphlet. There are some others.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Désirée. That's really sweet of you.
Okay, I have to put on my glasses for this one. So I wrote a short story, so I'm not going to read it all. It's in the Book of Sheffield. I thought I'd show an actual book because this is my love over here. I was doing some research about, I wanted to find out about Sheffield's links to the African Holocaust. I was just, you know, I was asked to write a book of Sheffield, and because I'm not from here, but I live here, I kind of wanted to find a pre the war's blackness, and I ended up finding a girl, Ghanaian baby, buried in an unmarked grave in a cemetery, a kind of quite a posh, well looked after cemetery in Sheffield, and she was here in 1902 as part of an Ashanti village that was brought over with, I think, I'm not sure if it was 100 or 200 villagers as entertainment, as spectacle for people to pay and go and find. And I realized that she probably found me whilst I was digging around looking, and then I wrote this short story from her point of view. It's called Born on Sunday Silent. I fell in love with myself from early on. I fell in love with my name. The trees were heavy with leaves, they touched each other, and I felt their caress. The grass a pillow, the stone a bed. Remember, born on Sunday, Kai Akusia Mansa. Do not forget it or get it wrong. It tires me, this casual wrongness, this no need for correction. My father was not a chief or a warrior, but the man that was tasked to dig ditches. We were neither noble nor savage. We dug ditches. Ditches that were straight, ditches that curled around forests or followed the path of the moon. I was born on a Sunday, the third female to my mother, not yet moving and moving all the time. I cross roads. I jump water, I climb trees, I walk paths. Like the last point of an echo getting smaller and quieter as time goes by. That noise is forgotten, edited, it is done. My bed, open to wind. I saw floods that came from the hills to wash away the rest of the people not killed by war or sickness. Died sleeping. The clocks did not stop for me. The mirrors kept their shine. When to explore might have meant to lose yourself in other than home. Third daughter, what of my sisters? What of 1 and 2? As if I, a child, can understand the connection that made me, as if I, born on Sunday, silent, is knowing of any other desire but that for my mother, my home, my breath. Home is a lost sentence, a foreign land I have no visa for. When I came here in my mother's belly, you had already been there lifetimes, as she squatted against the cold in so much cloth she could barely move. She and her sisters and my sisters crouching over pots and their weaving. They watch the ditch digger dance. I tell her I'm here. I tell her I'm coming. When I went to the Central Library, the people there looked me in the eye and told me I didn't exist. Empire and the slave trade had rested differently here. They had untethered them from each other. They gave me a big folder. I pointed out that there were only notes on abolition, Wilberforce, Mary Ann Rosen. But where is the information about Sheffield and the slave trade? Well, we don't like talking about it. It's too uncomfortable. I like it that she hadn't pretended that it didn't matter. I liked it that she looked at me. The librarian shook her head with a disbelief and embarrassment. She said, we don't want to hear about what we did. We only want to hear what we did about it. How can books contain so much silence? I am born on Sunday, silent. I walk the paths, I roll down the steep banks, I jump water, I climb trees. Home is a memory that I don't have. And all I remember is here. Be that as it may, it is only left to say, with my hand on the chest where there is no heartbeat, that you move along now. You have taken far too much already.
Oh, wow. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Thank you. I need to cheer up, man.
How did you feel when you discovered the grave of that baby girl?
Wow, I cannot even tell you. It still actually makes my heart race a little bit, even reading it and wondering if I've done her justice and wondering if I'm doing the right thing. But I felt like it was a story that needed exposing because, you know, we're hung up in terms of our history of diaspora here. We end up being caught by the African Holocaust and not necessarily moving towards colonialism and what colonialism did, so that trade ended, but also, you know, it was the beginning of the colonial project, which continued for many, many years, and we can say is still continuing economically now, really, in terms of empire and colony and stuff. So, and I had spent quite a lot of time doing things I shouldn't do in that graveyard as a student and thinking, I know that there's something here. I felt like there was something here. And then I went to many graveyards actually, because I was thinking about soldiers, perhaps First World War soldiers, perhaps, and then discovered that Kai Akusiamansa was buried at Sheffield General Cemetery in 1902. And it kind of sort of, you know, made my heart beat. And I thought, she found me actually, whilst I was looking for this other story. This story just kind of came, and I found other stuff like I don't know if you know about is it Wild Big Hickok and his Wild Wild West tours. They toured the whole of the north of England. They went to Sheffield, Leeds, Scarborough, and a brave had died here also doing one of the tricks, and he was buried here, but there was a campaign to get his remains taken back to, I think it was to the Sioux Nation. And I just really think there's a lot. It goes back to, I'm a bit of a history nerd as well, but it also goes back to the stories that are left untold.
Can I ask both to Amina and Désirée, like where can people buy your work? And could you maybe like show your pamphlet or show anything that you have to hand where people can?
I'm super unprepared because it's over there on my desk. So
that's okay.
Désirée, you can
get it.
Désirée, you chat about where people can get your work, and I'll pick mine up.
Okay, yeah, no, go and get it. So the Book of Sheffield is published by Comma Press, edited by Catherine Taylor. Comma Press is a Manchester-based publisher. The book that I've written is called Seduce, and it's published by People Tree Press, which is based in Leeds. And I have various short stories all over the place. It's just too long. Don't want to bore you, but yeah.
So you're gonna have to repeat that to me off camera, maybe, so I can. I'll just Insta talk you. I'll just like Twitter stalk you. Just
do it. I'm gonna do the same. Absolutely.
Sick. Yeah. So this is my pamphlet, A Warning to the House That Holds Me, published by Flipped Eye Press, December last year. So yeah, please don't get it on Amazon. I don't know. I feel like go to the root of it, go to the Flipped Eye website, and you can get it there. So that'll be great.
I think Amazon is that's a whole nother conversation in terms of what it means for writers and what it means for publishers, isn't it?
Exactly.
I kind of have a double-edged sword thinking about Amazon, because on one hand, you need to go to the publishers, support indie presses. Exactly. They always end up doing the heavy lifting of the bigger presses, so that's important. But I think people might be broke. So Amazon offers this really cheap alternative. So yeah,
of course, like it is
It's tricky.
Yeah, you're right. It is tricky, but
Yeah.
if you can, yeah, I would definitely like, yeah, support small indie pressing if you can.
Definitely.
Okay, and just before we wrap up, there is a question that I missed. The person on YouTube who wanted to ask us about womanism and the relationship between womanism and feminism, if maybe all of us could like quickly respond to that question before we finish, because I think it's such a great question as well. Again, like going back to, I was talking about African literature and going back to womanism, I see it as very much something that's based in Africa and comes from African women. I feel like I forget the name of the first person who, one of the first people to coin it from an African perspective. But she was definitely a woman. I think she was possibly a Ghanaian scholar, and yeah, so I see womanism as really important because it kind of moves us away from feminism can be quite a Western term, and it can also be associated with white feminists and the kind of US second wave of feminism, which was happening in like the late 1960s and the 1970s. And I feel like womanism is almost like a reclaiming of feminism, I guess, from the perspective of Black women, and also very much rooted in African culture, and even like African culture isn't a thing, but like African diaspora, heritage and identity. So yeah, I see womanism as kind of in conversation with feminism. But I also think that it's really important for me personally. I like to take up the space of the term feminism and say that, okay, feminism is not just for a certain kind of women, it's for women of every class, race, gender, ability. You could go on. I think it's important that we reclaim feminism, and Black feminism, I think, is a great way to do both of those things at once.
No, I definitely agree. I see Black feminism, I guess, like you said, and we've all mentioned before, as also inclusionary of like non-binary people as well. Like it isn't, we're not just talking about second wave feminism or what feminism has really been built to be exclusionary and to not include people from all walks of life. But I guess for me, you're right. Like it does seem that there's this conversation between womanism and Black feminism as well. And for me, womanism is more the spiritual side of sort of everyday living, and I feel it's more of like I feel it for me personally is more of a connection to like my spiritual side of what it means to be a woman. And I see Black feminism as inclusionary of working class people, non-binary people, queer people. That's sort of my thing. But I also at the same time, like maybe one can't exist without the other as well, and they both have the weight to it and both have their space.
Yeah, I agree with you, Amina. I think I suppose womanism feeds into Black feminism in a way, and that kind of reaction, because white or second wave feminism kind of wasn't really dealing with the body at all. It wasn't really dealing with emotion, with love, with the radicalness of love, as you say, and the radicalness of self-love, and motherhood, and choosing not motherhood. It didn't really talk about the body or the choices that we want for ourselves in that way. So I think feminism encompasses that, and that it is a personal thing rather than a collective movement. Whereas Black feminism feels to me, I think I agree with you. I think Black feminism feels more macro, and womanism feels maybe micro. Yeah.
And I think if we're using that sort of, I like the definition of the macro and the micro. I would say bell hooks all about love is a womanist text and not maybe a feminist text, because it is about the body and it's about the micro and like the more the what when you internalize things, like how does it sit in your body and how how does that work within your body?
Yeah.
Wow, I think we need to wrap up. I could talk to you both for hours, but yeah, I think it's time to wrap up. So thank you so much to the audience on YouTube for your questions, for your engagement. And yeah, it's been like so great talking to you both.
That's been amazing. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
This is great. Thank you. I don't want to stop. I could talk to you two for ages. I think we need to start a Can't Stop Talking club. And thanks very much to the Lit Collective as well. I can't wait to see all the other stuff. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
all
you.
of you. It's been really, really amazing. Real privilege.
Yeah, you can tune back into this YouTube channel later on for the evening events. But until then, we'll be off. So thank you.
Sweet. Bye, everyone.
Bye.